introduce you to Ffion Rees, who's skipper and naturalist. She's worked as a skipper and naturalist for 25 years, running guided wildlife boat trips around the Welsh coast, and has a breadth of knowledge and experience, and it puts her in a unique position to provide insight into our precious ecosystems around our coast. So hope you're ready for Ffion, who'll be talking us through which species you might see in our waters, how to tell who is who, and how to interact with them responsibly. Thank you very much, Ffion.
Randa pawb I croeso. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to introduce you, hopefully, to some of the cetaceans and seabirds of Wales, and it's very much a broad overview. So what we might see, where we might find it, and how to behave around it. And I'm going to start with a quote from David Attenborough, apart from the fact that he is obviously one of my heroes. It just kind of explains why a lot of us spend our time out in the environment. It seems to me that the natural world is the greatest source of excitement, the greatest source of visual beauty, and the greatest source of intellectual interest. It is the greatest source of so much in life that makes life worth living. So this is me out in the office, and why do I do what I do? I love being out there, and I also love being able to take other people out there and inspire them to what we might see around our coast. But I think that with that comes the responsibility to do it ethically and to do it responsibly. It gives not only a better experience for our guests, but it also obviously protects the wildlife for future generations. So a quick overview, we've had a bit of an overview from Kate as well, but an overview of where we're looking at. So we've got the Irish Sea here, obviously the coast of Wales. You may notice these two broad yellow bands, and these are seafronts. So the north there, we've got the Western Irish seafront, and at the southern end, we have the Celtic seafronts. Ocean fronts, they're boundaries between two distinct water masses. That could be water masses moving in different directions. They could have different salinity, different temperatures, but it's just a boundary in the ocean. And the Celtic shelf, the lower one here, actually forms part of the continental shelf of Europe. But these ocean fronts are very important. So what do we have here? We have plankton soup. This is actually taken out in the Celtic Deep. And these frontal systems are areas of important ocean frontal activity in the summer, and you get large aggregations of copepods, tiny little zooplankton recorded there, and that is what a copepod looks like. So they can be anything from 0.2 millimeters to 17 mil, depending on the species. So they're pretty tiny, but plankton are the cornerstone species of our marine life, really. It makes it good foraging ground for both marine mammals and birds. So we're going to start off with the seabirds, and I've literally just had to pick a few. So we've gone for the species that spend most of their life out on the open ocean, coming into us just to breed. And here we have the auks. We have Guillemots on the left here, very similar to the Razorbill, although you have the sort of different beak distinction there, and the Razorbills are slightly darker. And of course, everybody is familiar with the very charismatic Puffin. And these birds come in late April. They'll be with us till mid-July, so they're just visitors, and they come to the sea cliffs, mostly of the offshore islands in Wales, a lot of them in Pembrokeshire, where they come to breed. So the puffins, these will breed in burrows, and Skoma actually has 24,000 individuals by a recent count. So they do quite well in our waters. They're struggling, however, elsewhere, and puffins are on the IUCN Red List, so they are an endangered species. Moving on to the Guillemots, they breed on the sea cliffs, where they breed in very, very tightly packed numbers. So they go for the safety in number approach to try and deter predators. They will cram as many as they can get onto the ledge, and they literally have the smallest area of any of our breeding seabirds. It's the 2 inches in which they stand up. So space is at a premium. You can see a little egg poking out here. They don't build a nest. They lay their eggs directly on the rocks, and they then incubate it on their feet, very similar to the penguin. Here we have a slight variation on the theme, so keep an eye out for these little bridal guillemots. We don't get many of them this far south, but you do get a few. And then the Razorbill, also a cliff nester, very like the Guillemot, but they don't go for the safety in numbers. They'll tuck themselves, as you can see here, in little nooks and crannies under overhangs, and this is all in an attempt to deter predators. Predators are things like ravens, greater black-backed gulls, peregrines, big predatory birds. I popped this in just because it makes me laugh. This is a Razorbill just checking that the coast is clear before he here ensconces himself in somebody else's nest. This is a kittiwake nest, but they don't build their own nests. So just a little bit about how to behave around these breeding seabirds when we go out to have a look at them. So signs of disturbance, what does it look like? So things like the auks, the guillemots and the razorbills, head bobbing can be one of the first signs that they're a little bit agitated. You get increased vocalizations and birds may fly off the cliffs. That's kind of worst case scenario. What can cause it? Well, from a point of view of an operator, it can be the speed we go in, how close we go, how much noise we're making, whether there's lots of movement and whether there's lots of us, and also the amount of time that we spend with them. But do remember, it's not just humans that can cause disturbance. There may have been a predator come past, it can be bad weather, there could be somebody standing on the cliff, and it could be a combination of things. You don't know if just before you came in, there was a predator came in, so they're all twitchy. So you kind of need to kind of keep an eye out on what's going on. So how to avoid it? Kind of average guidelines for pretty much all of the UK is keep 50 metres away from nesting seabirds. The rest is fairly sort of obvious, but move slowly and quietly, be observant, have a look at what's going on and then react accordingly. So the possible negative impacts, at its worst, it could be loss of eggs if they've had to fly off that breeding ledge. It's a really precarious little site for those eggs. So they could lose their eggs. There's an increased chance of predation if an egg or a chick is left unattended, and reduced feeding of either the chicks and or the adults. And with all the marine codes, and Kate's mentioned quite a bit about the codes, they're great guidance, but nothing beats knowing your wildlife. So if you know your species and you know how it's likely to react under stress, you can look out for those really subtle signs and you can react accordingly before it becomes too much of a negative impact. So kind of knowing your species, and as Kate said, there's all sorts of information out there to help you with that. So these birds, they're not here for very long, and when the chicks leave the ledges, they leave when they're very young because they're super vulnerable to predation. You saw how precarious those ledges were. The guillemots and the razorbills are about 2/3 the size of mum and dad when they leave. They're tiny and they can't fly. So they have a little bit of a shock when they jump off the ledges, but they will swim out to sea after dad, not being able to fly for a good 1.5 to 2 months when they get their full adult flight feathers. And dad teaches them the ropes. Mum stays at home with the girls on the ledges until all of the chicks have left. Puffins, however, they can fly when they leave, and they leave on their own. But all of the auks are not particularly aerodynamic. So they're fabulous swimmers and divers. Guillemots have actually been recorded at depths of 200 metres, which is pretty phenomenal. When it comes to flying, not so much. So they're like little wind-up bath toys. Their wings are going and their feet are going, and they're still not really getting airborne. So at sea, they spend most of their time on the water and under it, where they're happiest. A puffin has to beat its wings 400 beats a minute just to stay in the air. What are they eating? Largely sand eels, and the puffin definitely wins out as to who can fit the most food in its beak. 61 sand eels is the record, and the way they do it is they have these little spikes coming down from the roof of their mouths. The only other bird I've seen that on are the penguins. So onto the Manx shearwater. Over half the world's population of these birds breed on the Pembrokeshire Islands, 350,000 pairs alone on Skomer. And unlike the auks, these are masters of flight, but you'll only see these birds if you're out early or out late or you're further offshore. So they leave the islands at dawn and come back at dusk. They're burrow nesters and they're very, very susceptible to predators on land because they're very, very clumsy on land, but they really are masters of flight. They have a very straight-winged gliding flight. They make the most of the updraft of the waves, known as the ground effect, and they do a massive migration to the coast of Argentina over the winter. So they are only with us for the summer months, but they do have quite a long breeding season, being here until about late August. So it brings me on to rafting seabirds. So all these seabirds that are coming in to breed, we've seen some of the numbers. When they're not on the ledges, they'll be out at sea fishing. If they've been fishing, they will quite often, after they've fed, sit on the surface of the water, and you'll often get big rafts of them digesting, having a bit of rest, or maybe just off the islands where they're kind of biding their time, having a rest between taking back up parental duties, either on incubating the egg or feeding the chicks. So it's really important that we don't disturb rafts of seabirds because that's their chill time, and they need that sort of recovery and snooze time. Any of you who are homeschooling will be very aware of this. So onto the gannets. Can't not mention the gannet. They are our largest seabird and they are absolutely incredible birds. So Grasshome Island off the coast of Pembrokeshire, home now to between 10 and 12% of the world population of northern gannets. Absolutely incredible sight. And it's actually the 4th largest gannet colony in the world. And they are incredible divers. You'll see them all around the coast of Wales. And quite often you can watch this from the shore as well. They have this amazing diving technique. So you can watch this here in sort of stages just before they hit the water. They dislocate their wings. They a split second before they hit the water. They're very, very streamlined. They can impact that water at 60 miles an hour and go anything up to 20 meters under the water. And they really have a huge array of adaptations, which unfortunately I'm probably not going to be able to go through right now, but feel free to ask some questions later. So I'm going to move on now to what we might be seeing under the water, onto the cetaceans. And I'm going to start with our smallest cetacean. This is the Commodore Harbour porpoise. And it's also one of our most commonly sighted cetacean around the coast of Wales. It's only 1.5 meters in length, and they're not very charismatic in their behaviour. So although you can see pretty much the whole of the porpoise here, you see this lovely little blunt nose, they rarely come right out of the water. More likely what you're going to see is this sort of roll of the back here, and that little triangular fin. They're very shy, they're not interested in boats, so your best bet with these guys, switch off your engine, just drift, always approach slowly, never follow them, and they'll just pretty much carry on doing what they're doing. And mostly what they're doing is feeding. They will spend 80% of their time feeding just to sustain themselves. They've been likened to aquatic shrews. They have a very, very fast metabolism because they're quite small and have quite a large surface area, so they lose heat quite quickly. And the best porpoise fact, recent research suggests that they can eat anything up to 550 small fish an hour. And they're tidal feeders. So again, it's a bit of a clue as to where you may find them feeding. When we're looking at cetaceans, they live in a world of sound. They live in a 3D environment. And so what they're doing is they're echolocating. It's just a bit of a graphic here where they're sending out clicks and letting that bounce off their area, the area around them. They build up a picture of what's happening around them, and it also enables them to catch their prey. And most of the species will also have a different form of communication in things like whistles, where they're actually communicating with each other. Porpoises tend to hang out in quite small pods. It can be as few as 3 or 4 animals. They're not as social and don't hang out in such big numbers as some of the larger cetaceans. But it's worth, on the echolocation, it is just worth remembering for those of us like me who drive boats around, that, you know, we are causing quite a lot of noise, and that will impact them as well. So on to the common dolphin, one of our most commonly sighted dolphins in the area, and they're a species that you get all over the world, in all our oceans except Antarctica. 2.5 meters, so bigger than the harbour porpoise, and they've got these beautiful hourglass patternings down their side. And they're a pelagic species, so you find them offshore. They move around a lot, so they could be with us 1 week, they might be down in Cornwall 2 or 3 weeks later. They're not resident in the area as such, they move around a lot. Very playful, and they will play with boats. They will come and bow ride. They are curious. So a good kind of tip with these guys is to always maintain a relatively slow speed, but they give them the chance. If they want to come and play, they will. They may not be in the mood. Reasons they may not be in the mood to play, one of them is feeding. If they're feeding, then they won't be interested in you at all, in which case it's good to just back off and watch from a distance. Signs of feeding, they will actually herd the fish. It's a very efficient way of hunting. They will cause bubbles and get the fish to congregate in a really tight shoal, and then they can pick them off. They work very closely with each other to manage this, and they have a very complex communication system. So much so they think they even have individual whistles for each members of the pod. So super, super intelligent animals, these. The other time we sometimes come across them when they're snoozing. So they'll do what's called logging. We saw it in the seals, something similar, where they sleep on the surface of the water. All of our cetaceans are conscious breathers. This means they have to make a conscious effort to open their nostrils and then close them to breathe. Unlike us, we breathe without thinking about it, fortunately, I feel. But these guys can only shut off 1/2 of their brain at a time when they're sleeping, otherwise they would drown. And then we have the bottlenose dolphin, considerably larger than the than the commons. So they can grow up to 3.5 meters. Whenever I see them, because I'm used to the commons, I kind of think, wow, they're really big. Much darker, you don't have that hourglass patterning, although they are lighter underneath, and they will often be resident in an area. So obviously we have Cardigan Bay, we have resident pods of Bottlenose Dolphin, so they'll be seeing the same animals day in, day out. So very different from the common dolphin. And also you'll quite often get the bottlenose quite close inshore, which is also quite different from the commons. And then onto one of my favourite dolphins. These are the Rissos dolphins, and they are really big. So they can grow up to 3.8 metres. I remember the first time I saw one, it was years ago, and I'd never seen them in our waters, and I thought it was a whale. I had no idea what it was. But we, over the years, we've been seeing more and more of these, which is great. They have this big bulbous nose. Again, they don't have the sort of beak that you think about when you think of dolphins. And you can see all these white markings on them. As they get older, they get more and more white. And this is scarring, both from social interaction. They're a very sociable species. You tend to find them in quite large pods. They play quite a lot. So this is scarring from social interaction and also from their food. So they're a deep water species, and they specialise in feeding on squid. Not exclusively, they will eat fish as well. But because they're a deep water species, we don't know an awful lot about them. We know they're quite long lived. They don't mature until they're about 13. So, but yeah, other than that, they're a fairly enigmatic species that we don't really know that much about. So the other thing you'll see is calves out there. All of the species that I've mentioned so far breed in the Welsh waters. How can you tell it's a calf? Well, obviously they're a lot smaller, but there are a few other things that kind of pointers that can tell us a little bit more about the calves and how old they are. So here we've got a couple of Rissos calves, and because they're quite young and they haven't had that social interaction or encounters with prey, they don't have the scarring, so they're much darker. The other thing you will find on cetaceans is calves is these vertical pale stripes, and these are fetal folds from where they're curled up in the womb. And sometimes you'll also see them with floppy dorsal fins. Now they lose these feet, the dorsal fin is floppy when they're born for fairly obvious reasons. But they lose these fetal folds at about 3 months. So you can tell how old a calf is if they've still, or have a guess if they've still got those fetal folds. But calves can be particularly vulnerable to disturbance. They're often playful and curious. We've had calves, really young calves, come up, and then sort of common dolphins come up and have a look at the boat, and then mum has kind of shepherded them away and gone, yeah, you've had a look, now you're coming over here. So we need to be kind of extra careful around them and always avoid splitting up mums and calves. So on to some of the bigger species. So here we have the Minke Whale. This is our most commonly sighted whale in our waters, in Welsh waters generally. And they're a member of the Rorqual whale family. And Rorqual refers to these kind of throat pleats or ventral grooves that you can see down the front there. Rorqual comes from the Norse meaning furrow, and they're filter feeders. And so they take in huge gulps of water and hopefully lots of fish and krill and plankton, and then they force it out through their baleen plates. And yeah, these pleats gives them their name, the Rorqual whale. Now, minke also are a relatively boat-shy species, but they can be curious. So again, with these guys, it's quite good to just switch off, sit around and just kind of see if they come and have a bit of an encounter. Youngsters in particular, again, can be very curious and come up and have a look at the boat. But if they're in the mood, they can be super playful. I have to confess, this one wasn't taken in our waters. This is one I took down in Antarctica, but it's the only photo I had of this sort of behaviour. But this one is spy hopping. It's popped its head up out of the water so that it can have a look at what's going on above the surface. And this one played around for about an hour, so they can be very playful. And then on to the really big boys. The fin whale, and we do get them in our waters, generally out in the sort of more in the middle of the Irish Sea, but they have been spotted in St Bride's Bay, for example. They're 24 metres in length. They are the second largest whale in the world after the blue whale. They're enormous. If you see a fin whale, you'll know you've seen a fin whale. The back just goes on and on and on forever. But you've got here on this picture here, I don't know if you can see, there's a little common dolphin in front, just gives you a bit of an idea of the scale of the animal. And they have this very backward facing dorsal fin, which is quite a giveaway. And you'll often see them with see the blow first. You may not even see the animal, you might just see the blow itself. In between the fins and the seis, you've got, sorry, in between the fins and the minkies, you've got the sei, not commonly sighted, but you do get them in our waters. It's easy to mix these two up unless you have seen a fin, and then it's, you know, because it's so big. But these also have a very high dorsal fin, again quite fulcate, but it doesn't point backwards like the fin whale. And we don't know an awful lot about sei whales. So where might you find them? Well, feeding birds is a really good sign to where you might find cetaceans, because they do co-feed. Have a good idea of what topography, what's going on underneath you. So if you're going from deep water to shallow water, you have seamounts, waterfronts, as we mentioned earlier, depending on what the tides are doing. Things like porpoises will use certain areas at certain times of the tide. Feeding birds are a giveaway, and inevitably there is also a certain amount of luck involved. But I said they co-feed. Here we've got an example of, this was a feeding frenzy with a load of gannets and some common dolphin, and we were just sat with our engines off, and the whole thing just kept moving. But if you do come across feeding frenzies, don't be tempted to drive into or paddle into the middle of them, because you'll break up the bait balls, and these guys won't get their dinner. So just kind of watch from the sidelines, and you'll be treated to some spectacular views. Other giveaways, other signs to look for, splashes. Sometimes when we're out there, you'll catch a splash out of the corner of your eye, and that's all you see. You'd be like, oh, what was it? A lot of these species breach. They come right out of the water and come crashing down, and you'll see this splash, so worth hanging around. There are a couple of species of shark who do it as well. Footprints on the water. Because of the way a whale's tail moves, they quite often leave these sort of glassy patches, and you might see them going off in a direction, and it will tell you which way the whale is going. And I mentioned the blows with the fin whale. So a blow can alert you to the presence of a cetacean. Here we've got a minke. It's not very clear with a minke, the blow. The sei whale is quite distinctive, and you get this kind of bushy, relatively high blow. And then the fin whale, this blow can be 6 meters, so you can really see it from a distance. So keep an eye out for the blows. So how to behave around them? Well, there are national codes and guidelines all around the country, which are fairly general, but it's also worth knowing what the local codes and guidelines are. We saw earlier there are codes for all the areas, so wherever you are, it's worth knowing what the codes are for your area, specific to species and the area that you're in. I like this graphic because it's a really nice, simple one that shows you how to approach cetaceans in a kind of like user-friendly way. So basically, slow down on sighting. 5 knots is a good idea. Never go into the area ahead of them. Don't cut them off. Approach from the side. Slightly different for whales and dolphins. You want to keep a little bit further away from whales. They're not as fast moving, and they're not going to want to come and play, really. So keep your movements slow, steady and predictable. Don't speed up or slow down quickly, and don't make any fast turns. Approach from the side. Don't chase them, don't split them up, and don't hem them in. That's particularly important if there are more than one vessel there, or if you're in a restricted area like an estuary, and always give them the choice. If you're having to keep changing direction to stay with them, they've probably had enough. Remember to leave slowly. You've had all the excitement of seeing them. Don't go bombing off, just leave them in a respectful manner, and don't outstay your welcome. So why? Well, obviously it's better for the wildlife, it's a better experience for guests, but hopefully for us it's an opportunity to promote best practice and encourage other people to behave like that when they encounter wildlife for themselves. Also, we avoid worst case scenario, things like this. This looks like a boat strike. We don't know if it was, but it looks like it could have been. It was on a common dolphin in our waters. And this was a baby harbour porpoise that we found probably only a couple of hours after it had died. We took it to the strandings officer, and it was probably only a couple of weeks old, very thin, and had obviously somehow got split up from mum, or mum had been killed, or basically wasn't being fed. But yeah, the other thing we need to remember is that these guys our wildlife, marine wildlife, is already under pressure from other things. So there's pollution, there's overfishing, there's loss of habitat, plastics, entanglement. We don't want to compound the issue with what we're doing out there. So you can have the best plan in the world and all the marine codes in place, but sometimes wildlife will do its own thing. So this is some common dolphins that we spotted. They spotted us, made a beeline for us. And if this happens, just maintain your course and speed and just enjoy. Quite often with common dolphins, if you just stop and turn the engines off, they get bored. So they do like to come and play. So just on briefly to a little bit about some science, we teamed up with Bangor University and Sea-Watch Foundation and had a scientist come and do an MSc project with us on short-beaked common dolphin, and she was doing photo ID, and she actually ID'd 51 individuals over 2 months. This is just a little sample of the catalogue, and this is how she did it, by looking at the fin markings, and it is quite tricky with common dolphins. But it meant that we could match up. Some of our dolphins were heading out to Swansea, to the Menai Straits. And just to give you a quick idea, the broad estimate of numbers in the Celtic Deep of common dolphin is anywhere between 24,000 and 249,000. Now that is a lot of wriggle room. So we can actually help to close this gap with citizen science. Scientists can only be in one place at one time. We're out there for hundreds of hours. And with very little extra effort, we can contribute to what we know about these things. More knowledge can lead, hopefully, to more effective conservation. So these are some citizen science marine apps. There's a Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum, which is a phone app. Sea-Watch Foundation has an app. These are UK based. And then we have, these are global ones. Happy Whale is another, it's a cetacean app. And the Secchi Disc is a global plankton watch. I'm not going to go into the Secchi Disc because I've realised I've just run out of time. But if you're interested in it, I can talk to you about it in the Q&A at the end. Balloons, my pet hate. We see loads of them out there. If you see them out there, clean them up. But also it gives us an opportunity to educate people, let them know this is where it ends up and we can actually do something about it. There's an estimated 18 tonnes of plastic on Grasshome. And this is just a very poignant image. This gannet did actually get saved, but a lot of them don't. So we kind of need to change our uses on plastic. So very, very quickly, just to sum it up, know your wildlife, interact responsibly, help inspire the next generation, and have fun. I didn't take all of the photos. I had a couple from Linden, but they were pretty much, apart from this Minke, all taken around the coast of Pembrokeshire. So diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ffion. Might have 2 minutes just to have a look at the Q&A. Might be able to fire one question at you. A nice one here of what's Ffion's favourite, most memorable wildlife sighting in Pembrokeshire? A nice one to end on.
I think probably it was the first time I saw a Minke Whale breach, and we were out offshore, and I'd seen them before, but I'd never seen one breach. And I didn't manage to get anything coherent out to my customers. I just went, and it was just amazing. So I think, yeah, the first Minke Whale I saw breaching was probably, at the time, yeah, it was pretty special.
That's pretty amazing. Thank you, Ffion.